So, we saw in the last video how Rousseau saw human history up till his own day as an ever increasing process of corruption of that original state of purity and innocence. Through a slow step by step process, man, men lost their natural virtue and liberty and became subject to tyranny. And that's basically where we find mankind at the beginning of Rousseau's work. The social contract. It begins with famous phrase, man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. And he says, I don't know how this happened. Though in a previous work, he's just narrated a possible story of how this happened. But he admits that he doesn't really know the complete history. It's just conjecture. But the question of how to make the state legitimate, how to turn our subjection into something more free, more legitimate, more just. That's what he's seeking to tell us in his work, The Social Contract. Now, doing this does not mean returning to a state of nature. That's not what Rousseau wants at all. He doesn't believe it's desirable or possible for man to go back to being a primitive, noble savage living isolated but blissfully self-sufficient lives. It's not going to happen, and he doesn't want it to happen. Because the benefits of civilization are many and they're significant. What he wants to do is to find a form of society, form of political coexistence that can have all the benefits of authority while still retaining that natural freedom. And it's not a matter of compromise. Rousseau wasn't a man for compromising anything. He didn't believe that you could have a little bit of freedom, but give some of that freedom away. That wasn't what he wanted. He believed that freedom was the essence of mankind. To stop being free meant to stop being human. And so he puts it, as I say, in the starkest terms. He says the problem is to find a form of association which will defend and protect with the whole common force the person and goods of each associate, and in which each, while uniting himself with all, may still obey himself alone and remain as free as before. This is the fundamental problem to which the social contract seeks to provide a solution. How do we bond ourselves into civil society, but retain the freedoms that came before civil society? How do we put ourselves in subjection to each other but remain as free as before? How do we do that? How do we reconcile authority with liberty? Hobbes would say, if you remember, you don't. You give up your freedom. When it comes to authority versus liberty, trust me, authority is better. Rousseau didn't want this. He didn't want an absolutist rule. He didn't want to give up any liberties to the king. So Rousseau comes up with his own notion of the social contract. His notion of the social contract is very different from the previous ideas about the social contract that we've seen. He says, in summary, these clauses, properly understood, may be reduced to one: the total alienation of each associate, together with all his rights, to the whole community. For, in the first place, as each gives himself absolutely, the conditions are the same for all, and this being so, no one has any real interest in making them burdensome to others. Each man, in giving himself to all, gives himself to nobody. And as there is no associate over whom he does not acquire the same right as he yields others over himself, he gains an equivalent for everything he loses, and an increase of force for the preservation of what he has. That's Rousseau's idea of the social contract. Everybody gives up everything to everyone else. And in this way, Rousseau is kind of redefining freedom in a certain way. This is how he reconciles authority and freedom. He redefines them both in a way that makes them compatible. You give away everything that you have, which doesn't sound like freedom to me, but because everyone is doing it, you get back everything you had before. Not only do you get it back with interest. personal freedom becomes collective freedom. What you lose in your own personal freedom, you gain in terms of the unity and benefits of cooperation, but also a unified state in which every man is free. Rousseau invites us to imagine a world in which I am bonded in servitude to you, and you are bonded in servitude to me reciprocally. And so, in that way, we're both free. We're both kind of master and servant combined. Everyone decides what's best for everyone and does accordingly. So, everyone is autonomous. Autonomous means self-legislating, and you gain freedom by participating in and making the laws to which you're held. Unlike Hobbes, he doesn't see the social contract as recognizing a single individual as sovereign. Sovereignty, the kind of sovereignty that emerges from the social contract, is that of a kind of superhuman agent that he calls the general will. He says, if we then discard from the social compact what is not of its essence, we shall find that it reduces itself to the following terms. Each of us puts his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will, and in our corporate capacity we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole. The general will is what happens when everyone gets together and decides what's best for everyone. It isn't the sum of all individual wills. It isn't what I want for me plus what you want for you plus what he wants for him. And it isn't the average of all our wills or a kind of compromise between what we all want for ourselves. It's what happens when we all decide what we want as a universal set of laws. We all decide what's best for everyone. That was Rousseau's view of what a good society looked like and what a just state looked like. It's a society based on popular sovereignty, all creating and obeying the general will. You become free not through being left to yourself, but by participating in the legislative process. You become free through citizenship. Rousseau exalted the idea of the citizen. He signed all of his letters Jean-Jacques Rousseau, citoyen de Genève, citizen of Geneva. That's what he aspired to, not a writer or a philosophe or anything else, but a citizen. That was the idea. That was the ideal, the highest thing that anyone could aspire to. And his ideal state was a democratic one, but it wasn't based on traditional Athenian models of democracy. A lot of freedom-loving writers and revolutionaries in the 18th century looked to Athens as a kind of model or prototype of a democratic city-state. But Athenian citizenship was too mild and temperate for Rousseau. Athenian citizens lacked the necessary devotion, and instead Rousseau looked to the neighboring martial warrior state of Sparta, and he gave an example of his ideal of devoted citizenship in a story of the Spartan mother. He says, a Spartan mother had 5 sons in the army. A helot, that's a kind of messenger, helot arrived, and trembling she asked his news. Your 5 sons are all slain, says he. Vile slave, was that what I asked you? Oh, we have won the victory. She hastened to the temple to render thanks to the gods. Now that is a citizen, Rousseau says. That was Rousseau's ideal, ultimately, giving up your private interests and devoting yourself to the interests of the entire community.